This is the Podcast, your privacy and data podcast, with me, Anthony Brown, interviewing leaders from across the industry to provide you with news, views, insight and opinion. Join me for Series 3, where I'll be talking to privacy thought leaders about their stellar careers. This is Journeys Through Privacy. Hello there, I'm Anthony Brown, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to another episode of the Podcast. Series 3 is all about Journeys Through Privacy. Each episode, I'll be talking to a leading privacy thought leader about their career journey. We'll discuss their stellar career in detail and learn more about their experiences along the way, both good and bad. For today's episode, I'm really thrilled to be joined by Cavan Fabris, who is a legal advisory lead partner for the Chamber's ranked data privacy, cybersecurity and telecoms practice at Deloitte UK. Deloitte, of course, are one of, if not the largest professional services firm in the world. Cavan, it's great to see you. A warm welcome to the podcast. And how is your year going so far?
Well, pleasure to be here, Anthony. Thank you again for the invitation. The year's going quite well so far. You know, despite the economic headwinds that we're all experiencing, I think privacy and cyber remain top priorities for many of my clients.
Absolutely, I can imagine so. And anyone listening to this, we're coming up towards the end of April in 2023, and there's no shortage of news at the moment, around the global geopolitical situation and the Ukraine war in relation to cyber issues, which I'm sure we may well touch on at some point today. But you're right in the middle of all of these issues, obviously at Deloitte. So I've been eager to record a podcast with Cavan, as he said, a really remarkable and truly international career, which has seen him work and live in multiple jurisdictions. His fascinating journey's seen him swap a successful career as a senior sales director in the telecoms industry for an even more successful career in law. Cavan now has over 20 years experience as a lawyer in the tech space and has worked internationally for some of the world's biggest tech and professional services businesses. In what must be a career highlight, surely, Cavan had the honour and privilege to spend 5 years serving as an economic and commercial diplomat with the US Department of State after accepting a presidential appointment from the then President of the United States, Barack Obama. Seriously impressive stuff. So lots to talk about, Cavan. Firstly, it'd be great to hear more about your early days, if you don't mind. Was there some signs early on in your life that perhaps you were going to spend a lot of time overseas, you were destined to work for international businesses?
Anthony, I don't know if I was ever destined for much of anything, mind you, but let alone a career internationally. I grew up largely outside the Washington, D.C. area in the U.S. And I think being around such an international city, a political city, one that exposes you to multiple cultures, multiple people, put me first and foremost, I think, just in the environment. And I think that you're a big product of the environments that you're in and the exposures that you have. I've been asked this question a couple of times, and it kind of takes me back to one particular event as a 13-year-old during a career day in school, in which I learned that the father of one of the good friends of mine was a career diplomat for the American government, and came in and told us about his fascinating story and his career path. In addition, my dad used to travel a tremendous amount internationally, would come home with the interesting stories as well as the gifts he'd bring home from far places abroad. And I think maybe those two things combined put me on a path. Other than that, it's been circumstances and opportunity.
Yeah, and I think from one of our previous conversations, correct me if I'm wrong, but I seem to remember that your parents had both, I think, emigrated or migrated, or they'd been all around the world themselves. Is that right?
Well, my dad had. I'm a product of if you look at most Americans, we don't necessarily say that we're American. American isn't necessarily an ethnicity. We're a product of a variety of different cultures and ethnicities from around the world. My mom is part of what many Americans would call Irish. There's more people of Irish descent in the U.S. than there are in Ireland, and I am proud to be to have that Irish descent through my mother. My dad was born and raised in Mexico City. Immigrated to the U.S. after meeting my mom when she was on a holiday. So pretty much a circumstance there. So yeah, I am a product of an immigrant family. I'm the oldest son of an immigrant to the U.S. That exposes you to different cultures. It exposes you to different things. It makes you distinctly aware of your origins, of who you are. But whether or not that necessarily shaped me in terms of an international career, I don't know. I don't think you necessarily think about all those things when you're a teenager. You tend to think about a bunch of other things. But I'm particularly proud of the background that I do have. I think it's shaped me in certain areas. It's exposed me to different cultures. And thankfully, I've had some wonderful opportunities to be exposed to international experiences abroad. At least at that time in the 80s and 90s when I was growing up, which were unique for somebody my age.
Mm. And do you remember, if you go back to those, your teenage years, for example, do you remember sort of having a sense that you would like to see lots of the world and work internationally and stuff, or is it just it's all organically?
No, I've always wanted to travel, always been fascinated by travel. And I think in the 80s and 90s, we were still enamored by travel. It wasn't the challenges of the slog of having to make your way through the airport as we do today. And I think the glamour of international travel was definitely something first and forefront in my mind. I had a wonderful opportunity while at university to work at the World's Fair in Seville, Spain, for several months, for about 9 months. And I think that exposure to multiple cultures, multiple people my age, I was 19 at the time, gives you a tremendous amount of respect, understanding, cultural awareness. And I think that probably really brought home the fact that I really enjoyed doing it, and I really enjoyed doing things in a foreign environment.
And you studied international studies,
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? That was your first degree, I think. So again, international. I mean, you may say that there wasn't a theme growing here, and it was just kind of happened, but all these things combined, it's quite funny, I would imagine, in hindsight, looking back.
I think looking back, I think that the goal in those days was to expose myself as internationally as I could. I was very politically oriented back then. The school that I went to had a specific school for international studies within its institution. It's called the American University School of International Studies. It's considered a diplomat training academy, not just for the Americans, but for other foreign governments. And being in Washington, D.C. exposes you to lots of different things. I had the opportunity to work on Capitol Hill on foreign affairs. I had the opportunity to work for a leading U.S. think tank on strange things like chemical and biological weapons proliferation. Worked for a foreign embassy. Things that you wouldn't necessarily be exposed to in other parts of the world or at other universities, and was just lucky to take advantage of those opportunities to broaden my cultural horizons, broaden the opportunities that I have in front of me. I had absolutely no idea what kind of career I'd make it out of any of it, but I was at least going to try to be as internationally focused as I could during that time.
Mm. So your first foray really, and at the start of your career, was really into senior sales roles within the telecoms industry. Is that right?
Well, yeah, my first job out of uni was I was a speechwriter for a governor in Virginia on economic and trade issues, and that exposed me to a lot of things on the business side of things. Moved that into a telecoms aspect. When I was working at the World's Fair in Spain, I was responsible for running what at that time was a video conferencing center, one of the first commercial video conferencing centers of its kind. Today, you and I are communicating through video conferencing that back in the early 90s you had to go to specially built facilities to do. So I ran one while I was there in Spain, and I think that's where I got the telecoms bug. So after finishing my political stint with in Virginia, I moved into tech because I've always loved tech and telecoms in particular. And the company that I was working for in the U.S. Moved me to Belgium. They sent me to Belgium to help them lead their European efforts in telecoms, and that then led to me getting a opportunity with my largest supplier at that time of wholesale telecoms bandwidth services, and that's how I got into telecom sales. And was lucky enough to start as an account manager for the likes of Colt and Cable and Wireless, and then grew that into leadership opportunities in the telecom sales and business development area.
So you spent a few years doing that, but then you found yourself deciding that you wanted to move into a career in law. What happened around that sort of time?
Don't know if that was necessarily a conscious decision. I, like many others, found themselves as victims of the dot-com bubble bursting. I found myself out of a job. I was the vice president of business development for a company that had a really difficult time getting a round of funding as a result of getting just some bridge funding to keep the company afloat. They had to let half the company go. And I was part of the leadership team that was associated with that half of the company. And during the dot-com bubble bursting, it's not as if there were other tremendous job opportunities available. So I took a pause, and it was during that pause that I was reminded by family and friends that, hey, you're not going to get another opportunity to go back to school. You're not going to get another opportunity to pursue something in law or maybe a business, an MBA. Take that opportunity now. I know it's going to be tough, they told me, because you're doing this as a second career. You're now 30, so now you got to reinvent yourself again. And in the States, to reinvent yourself as a lawyer, it's not simply going to take a test or what have you. It's a 3-year commitment in law school, plus what comes afterwards. So I took the plunge, put myself back through law school, and then reinvented myself as a telecoms lawyer.
Amazing! Wow. So I'm trying to picture when I was 30 and around that sort of age, and I think my son was born, and you sort of I remember myself at that time wondering, were days running out to maybe do something a bit different, or and I chickened out. I think every time, because I just felt I've got to earn, but in hindsight, it would have been fantastic to be able to do that.
I had a tremendous amount of support from my wife. We didn't have kids at the time yet, and I was the leading breadwinner in the family, and she was kind enough to invest in me, and to put me
Amazing.
through law school and to continue working when I was in law school, and that's how I was able to do it. Without that, I wouldn't have been able to do it. I think at a different time in my life, if kids were there, I would have just had to find another way to make a living rather than go without making a living for the 3 years.
So why law then, Cavan? What sort of?
Oh God, that's a good question, Anthony. I think it goes back to the people in my life at that point in time. I had relatives who said, oh, you'll be a great lawyer. I think we've all heard from our maybe our aunts, uncles, parents. Oh, you're a wonderful arguer. You'd make a great lawyer. And I think just listening to all those things, and then the second part of it, Anthony, is maybe fear is at that point in time after being made redundant. I think one of the things you look for is some career or job certainty, or at least as much as that you're going to get, right? And I felt that a career in law, if you did it well enough, provided a certain maybe higher level of job security, maybe a higher level of a level of independence. Maybe I thought at that time that even if I wasn't able to go the traditional law firm route, I could then at least go out on my own and control my own destiny as a lawyer. So I
Mm.
thought, with all those things in mind, that's why I chose law over, let's say, an MBA or something.
Yeah. So what does make a good lawyer then, outside of being good at arguing?
Oh God. And to be honest, I think I'm a horrible arguer now, but I think uh, I think the idea of a lawyer and what makes a good lawyer is rapidly changing. I think there used to be a time in which providing, excellent, timely advice on the black letter law has passed. I think clients look for more. They're looking for business solutions. They're looking for lawyers who understand what their organization does, who can tailor the law and the analysis of the law to meet a business need. They can drive value into the business. They can help see where there's business opportunities that could leverage interpretations of the law. And then they remove burdens from the general counsel. General counsels are forced today to do so much with so little. External legal support is more than just simply providing legal advice. It's actually helping them deliver solutions that they can't do on their own, either due to a capacity, their own individual capacity. It could be resourcing. It could be a number of different things. And they no longer have the desire or the time to read through 10, 20 pages of legal advice that don't necessarily come with a decision. It just comes with advice. It shifts the burden back to the general counsel to make a decision. And I think GCs want lawyers who help them on the decision making process by providing solutions. And that's, I think, where I've been lucky. As a second career lawyer and being in business first, you tend to understand the solutions that drive things. And I'm lucky that I have a background in tech, in the physical aspects of tech. I've been in data centers and pulled cables and installed routers, and then being able to sell it. And now as a lawyer, you can bring all of that together and deliver the solutions that I think general counsels are looking for to drive their business forward. And I think that shapes what attorneys are, in my opinion, what attorneys are going to become.
And I guess that's why, and we'll come on to this in a short while, but perhaps you were drawn, your skill set, your commercial experience was drawn almost inevitably to a professional services platform, where you could use that platform and plug in with all of your both the technical, legal, commercial expertise. Perhaps it was always written in the stars.
I think it's been. I wish it was that easy, Anthony. I think having a non-traditional career path, especially in law, that values a very traditional career path. If you look at most lawyers, there is a very well-traveled path in how to become a lawyer and how to become a good lawyer. I haven't followed that path. You look at my career and it goes all over the place, admittedly. That doesn't necessarily fall into, what the big law firms look for in this world. And that's why maybe finding a home in the non-traditional areas, the non-traditional professional services environment, has always been something that I've gravitated towards, because it's allowed me to bring all my skill sets together, not just the legal one. It's allowed me to combine my technical background. It's allowed me to combine my sales background with legal training and experience, with a little diplomacy thrown in there as well too, to hope to deliver solutions. And I think that that's what you go to professional services for, is for solutions rather than necessarily legal advice. However, I'll say that there's many, law firms out there that are now seeing the value of providing that full service uh, type of relationship with their clients. The challenge that we have today is how can we get law schools and the traditional way of training lawyers to recognize that the practice of law is rapidly changing, and the idea of churning out individuals who can simply understand and analyze the law is no longer good enough. They have to be able to sell. They have to be able to active listen. They have to be able to diplomatically diffuse situations, and they have to deliver solutions that are scalable. That the delivery of those solutions may, in fact, not always have to involve a lawyer,
Mm.
which would be unheard of, within more traditional legal services environments.
So it was an obvious kind of area for you to focus on and move into within TMT. I think initially was really your sort of broad focus. Casting your mind back to the early days as a lawyer, so I think we're talking mid noughties here. What do you remember around that time, around sort of any data privacy work or
Sure.
cyber stuff?
Yeah. No, my first job my was as a junior associate with the firm that's now called Womble Bond Dickinson. At the time, the American side of the firm was called Womble Carlisle Sandridge and Rice, which is a large law firm based in the southeastern portion of the U.S. And I joined as the only associate supporting 10 partners.
Right.
And that, I think, you learn a lot very quickly. And it was 10 partners with a very distinct collection of practices within the TMT world. We had everything from representing traditional radio stations in America through print media, to cable television providers, to telecoms providers, as well as some of the things that I used to get my hands in probably the majority of the time, which was representing entities in the Caribbean before national regulators on deregulating what were largely seen as anti-competitive markets in certain countries in the Caribbean to allow competitive services, especially on the mobile side. But in terms of privacy, what I saw was the very much American perspective of things. You had HIPAA, you had COPA, which were two American sets, which are two sets of American regulatory areas, one in healthcare, one in child protection. And I learned in supporting companies on HIPAA compliance, on COPA compliance, what privacy and data protection means to an American audience. And it's very much seen as a consumer protection perspective rather than the fundamental right that is the European perspective on things. And I think my exposure, especially representing media companies, on things along the lines of COPA, on First Amendment, freedom of speech types of issues, puts privacy at the forefront of some of those arguments. And it also allowed me to see how the Americans see that bit of data protection. Cyber back in those days wasn't necessarily a legal issue. It was, we didn't have a tremendous amount of proliferation of cyber issues at that point in time that required legal support. However, what we did have, though, was credit reporting agencies, which are a very big thing in the U.S. at that point in time, which, when you have, and the requests that you can make to a credit reporting agency to get disclosures as to how they have reached their decisions on calculating a credit score for you. So what personal information are they looking at in order to generate a score? And how can you go about correcting it if you, as John Smith, have been confused with another John Smith and wrongfully have now incurred detriment because of that confusion? So I think those exposures brought me face to face with some elements of privacy. I think my love for privacy and my desire for a privacy career was largely fed out of two things. One is a little bit of guilt, and the guilt comes from somewhat being responsible for putting the fiber optics in the ground that we all use as part of our connectivity to the internet. And to see from my very early days in telecom till today, realizing what has happened, in terms of the use of the internet, and social media and things along those lines. So it's wanting to ensure that the intention behind the creation of all these technologies in the internet, is done with understanding that there are people behind all of this, and then there's personal data inside all of this, and that needs to be protected and preserved. The second part is my kids. I see, if somebody wanted to bully me as a kid in the 80s and 90s, you had to do it to my face. Today, kids are exposed to all sorts of online threats, by individuals that they will never see face to face. And I think that there's an element in needing to be able to protect and preserve our children, children that who are doing all sorts of great things using the internet, whether it be programming skills, all the way up. There's also a need to ensure that the world that we're creating for them is a positive one.
Hmm. Yeah, it's pretty terrifying, isn't it? I've got children myself, and well, it's just still the Wild West in many ways, but progress is slowly being made. So you spent around 5 years, I think, in law firms, sorry, and then you moved in house, and you actually went on to work for two of the world's most successful and largest tech businesses. So Hewlett Packard, and Apple. How was that? And what made you move in house, and how was that transition for you?
Really enjoyed my in-house environment. I think similar to how I've gotten into professional services is how I moved in-house. I felt that there was a need to be on the inside. There was need to have a sense of belonging, to an organization, to an ethos, and help them move forward by providing legal assistance and support and guidance. My time at Apple was wonderful. I had always wanted to be part of Apple from growing up. I grew up learning on Macintosh computers. I grew up loving Apple devices, and I thought that I had reached the pinnacle of my career when I moved in-house to Apple. I thought it was just a great opportunity, and it turned out to be an absolutely wonderful opportunity. I was responsible for a few geographies in the world in supporting iPhone and iPad, in front of the carriers in the world, the Vodafones of the world, the O2s of the world, and helping side by side with our sales teams negotiate long-term partnerships with these carriers to get iPhone and iPad into individuals' hands. And that was a great experience. Got to work with some of the most wonderful people that I probably have ever had an opportunity to work with.
And did you meet? Do you have access to Steve Jobs whilst you were there, or?
I've met Steve.
Okay.
I was in a few meetings with Steve, especially on some of the deals that we were doing that were of significantly high value. Lucky enough to have a conversation or two with him. I wouldn't say I was particularly exposed to Steve. I was at Apple when he passed, which was a really difficult experience for all of us. Did probably a little bit more with Tim Cook,
Okay.
as he was COO during my time there, and then took over for Steve after his passing. And two very different individuals in their ways of working, but both extremely passionate about what they do, and learned a tremendous amount just from being exposed to the environment that both of them create.
So you moved from law firms, then you went in house. You had these amazing times, and particularly at Apple. But you then find yourself being approached with an opportunity to serve as an economic diplomat with the US Department of State. You spent 5 years then in this role. I mean, how does this come about? Tell us, please tell us.
Anthony, to this day, I don't, I've yet to really put my finger entirely on it, on how it happened. But when I was approached, it was a 5-year commitment. It was an opportunity to take some time away from what I was doing, make a commitment. I come from a family of government service. Both one of my brothers and my dad have been long involved in government service. Felt maybe it was my responsibility as well too, to do a little bit. But then, it goes back to maybe, a kid with a 13-year-old dream of maybe wanting to do something internationally. Maybe it's going back to that career day discussion from my buddy's dad, about his career. And then by that time, I had 2 young children when I was approached, and wanting my kids to maybe be exposed to a world outside of suburban United States was something that was interesting. So in hindsight, there's times in which I really miss the fact that I left Apple because, like I said, I really thought I had hit the pinnacle of everything that I could do, and everything that I wanted to do. Being a diplomat just exposed me to a whole different world of different experiences. And I'd like to say that I'm maybe better for all those experiences as a result.
And you were heavily involved at this time during that tenure within data privacy and cyber work, weren't you? On an international level, weren't you? Or basis?
Well, yeah, the U.S. government, as an economic and commercial advisor, we kind of get involved in lots of different things. But one of the things that I was earmarked to help with was on areas such as telecoms, areas such as cyber, especially at those point in time. The idea, or one of the priorities of the U.S. government, was to encourage cyber regulations, cyber activity, cyber defense amongst friendly countries, simply just because of the rise of internet proliferation, the rise of the use of the internet, and the tools that are being used around the world, committing to cybercrime and other various things. So yeah, I was exposed to that during my time as a diplomat in a variety of countries that allowed me to see cyber and data protection perspectives from a few different areas.
And then at the end of that period, you then decide, I guess, as a family, to relocate to the UK. So we're going to sort of 2017 here. What drove that? What happened?
Well, I had I had a 5-year commitment. That 5-year commitment came to an end. I think the idea was to return to the private sector. I had done my bit, so to speak. The question is what to do. My kids have been educated largely in English, and when I say English, I mean British curriculums around the world up to this point. London had always been sort of a second home for us whenever we had been abroad. We had always been, drawn to wanting to spend some time here. My wife and I also spent some time here before kids, as well, in the late 90s or early 2000s. And it was maybe just the thought that it was time to give London a go. At this point in time, I kind of needed a break. I've been going full out for a while now, and I wanted a transition that wasn't so sharp from the public sector back into the private sector. So I put myself through school again. So I went and did a master's in Bristol at Bristol Uni, which allowed me to renew my passion again for privacy and cyber. So I focused specifically on privacy and cyber during my master's in Bristol, specifically focusing on that time, which was cross-border data transfers pre-Schrems 2. So
Mm.
that was a great year for me to, get my head screwed back on straight, and allowed me to make a really good transition back into the private sector.
Mm. And of course, this is the year before GDPR came into play as well. So it's again funny timing, isn't it? How all these things kind of work out in someone's career.
It,
So you landed in the
timing's a
UK.
funny thing, Anthony. It's I don't think anything in life is all that linear. It's also, life isn't also, in my opinion, all that predictable.
Mm.
Life tests you to roll with the punches based upon what you're given, and you do your best to make something positive out of what you're given. I've been given a bunch of circumstances in my life, and I've tried to make the best out of each one of them. Some of them have worked, some of them haven't, and you learn from each one. But yeah, I think the timing of deciding to go back to school, deciding to give myself a little bit of a break to recharge the batteries, what was the right thing to do at that point in time. It allowed me to position myself for what was going to come next.
Yeah. Brilliant. And you then joined EY, is that right?
Yeah,
So
yeah. So
yeah.
I needed to put I needed to try to at least help, put some money and food on the table while I was doing my LLM. I part time did some work for a boutique legal services firm, and that got me involved in doing some great GDPR prep work and a bunch of other things, telecom support at a seasoned level. And then, right as I was about to finish my dissertation for my master's, EY approached me with an opportunity to come in and help them build out their data privacy and cyber function for EY Law here in the UK.
Amazing. Amazing. And so it was your first sort of foray into Big Four. Obviously, we probably best that we don't sort of, albeit I'm sure, and I know it's a very positive experience. It might be better to talk more about your present day. And you made a move to Deloitte. You're a partner at Deloitte, so you head the firm's data privacy, cybersecurity, and telecoms practice. What actually drew you to Deloitte?
I think two things drew me to Deloitte. One is that they made Deloitte Legal made a commitment to tech and to tech law through its acquisition of Kemp Little, which was about a year or so before I joined. That showed me that here was an organization that was putting tech and advising on tech issues at the heart of its organization, and that was something that was particularly exciting to me. That focus away from maybe the traditional aspects of the law, and more of a focus on where Big Four has its sweet spot, which I think tech is a big part of. So I think that was part of it. Second part was the ability to really take over and build a practice that was really not available to me elsewhere, and that ability to come in and build a data privacy cyber practice that's focused on a combination of delivering service solutions. So, not necessarily bespoke traditional pieces of legal advice, but actually scalable, deliverable solutions that we sell on an annual basis, combined with subject matter expertise in privacy and cyber, which is something that I'd wanted to do for some time, which was, I think, a niche within the legal services market that had yet to really be exploited. And Deloitte was very supportive in giving me that opportunity.
Fantastic. And I know from conversations previously, I think you've got, is it a team in Poland as well? Dotted internationally.
Yeah. My practice is very global. We in Deloitte Legal UK have a team in Poland that are part of our wider UK team. And they are specifically tasked with delivering managed services in a legal environment. So we do everything from the likes of contract lifecycle management, e-discovery, things along those lines. But I also am building a privacy and cyber function as well there too, so that when we scale for our clients, we can do so in a structured manner through this team in Poland, because not every solution requires an expensive London-based lawyer to address. And clients today are looking for efficiency. And we can deliver that efficiency today by doing a lot of the work in Poland and utilizing subject matter expertise when necessary, and therefore deliver our clients scalable solutions that are efficient and cost effective at the same time.
Excellent. So, as we've discussed, Cavan, today, you've. It sounds to me like you dreamt big from an early age. You've these opportunities have come along, and you've embraced them and grasped them with both hands. You've always looked outside of the box, that cliche, but you've always looked further afield, and you've always been horizon scanning. What part for you in your career, if any, of mentors played for you? Is there anyone that you remember that was a real mentor to you?
Oh, wow. I've had a lot of good work mentors along the way. And I think if I take maybe away the mentor aspect of it, because unfortunately, when you do move around a lot, the ability to build mentors or long-term friendships becomes more and more difficult as you're no longer next door or in front of those people that you'd like to socialize with more. I think I'm more a product of my experiences, Anthony, and I think it's I've been lucky enough to be surrounded by different types of people, different types of leaders, different types of leadership, different ways of working, and I think through that exposure to different things, you find what works for you. You find you find that every situation requires maybe a specialized answer when it comes to leadership and mentoring. It's not a one size fits all approach. And I think by being exposed and making plenty of mistakes along the way, you realize that what works and what doesn't work. And I think maybe lockdown was probably a good explanation of all of this, in which you're taken away from traditional office environments, which for me are very important because I enjoy being around others and learning from others and communicating with others. That communicating through the medium of Zoom or Teams just doesn't replace. So there was a period of time in which I missed that level of interaction, that level of mentorship. But I think it's maybe become a little bit more empathetic in the process, a bit more of an active listener. I wish I could draw on just one person or two people. I can't. I draw upon the positives and negatives of every boss that I've ever had, every coworker, and every friend that I've been lucky enough to have along the way.
And also, notably, your family as well. If we go back to that period when you were sort of 30-ish, it sounds like they played a huge part in your second career, if you like, in the future. So,
and I can't thank or appreciate that enough. I wouldn't be able to do anything that I'm doing today if it wasn't for them. And I'm 100% driven by that. Maybe it's a little bit of guilt, but at the same time, it's also a little bit of trying to be thankful at the same time. But yeah, I don't think anybody can get anywhere alone, and I think that's part of it. Is that you've got to surround yourself by the positive influences needed for you to succeed, and that may be different for each one of us. But it's important that in the very negative world in which we live in, that we try to surround ourselves, in my opinion, with as much positivity as we can.
Well, that's kind of answers what my next question was going to be in a funny way, because I was going to ask you, what's the biggest piece of advice that you'd give to someone who's starting their career journey now? I think you just kind of condensed it there quite nicely, but it sounds like positivity is a huge thing for you.
It is, and to be honest, I may not always be the most positive person because I like many others, get frustrated. I'm impatient. I want things to move faster than they do.
And you're human.
And I'm human.
Simply.
But I think if I'm going to give any lawyers or anybody else a bit of advice, it would be, don't be afraid to embrace an opportunity. It may not be everything that you hope it to be, or it could be more. But you may regret not taking the chance on yourself in the first place. Lawyers are taught to be risk adverse. They're not necessarily taught to bet on themselves. Bet on yourself. You got to bet on yourself. And if you can bet on yourself and have the support that you need to get you through the day when you choose to bet on yourself, when you've had a bad day, when you really don't feel like betting on yourself, surround yourself with others who can pull you up. And through that combination, you'll find your way. The world isn't linear. There's no guarantees in any of all of this. The only guarantee is what you bring of yourself every day. And to be honest, for most of us, we need a little help with that because we can't do it alone.
Excellent advice. Thank you, Cavan. For a bit of fun, and just to wrap things up, who would be your 2 ultimate dinner guests?
Oh, gosh. Now you can go so many ways on this one, Anthony. I'm going to go back a little bit and try to combine maybe some of my political love and history. I'm a big history buff. And I think I'd love to see what would happen in a room, in a conversation between maybe John Kennedy and Vladimir Putin.
Wow.
Given today's challenges in Ukraine and the war in Ukraine, I'm one of those people who feel that JFK's time on this earth was cut far too short. And I feel that his unique diplomacy at some very crucial times in history would be very interesting to hear and see how he would address what's happening in Ukraine today.
Well, it's hard to argue with those guests.
I could pick some others if I wanted to have a much different conversation. There's relatives I've never met in my life that I would have loved to meet. There's actors and actresses that I'd love to just understand what they're like off screen. But since we were talking about what drove me, and there's a level of international and a level of politics and a level of intrigue in what I've done, I thought I'd at least keep it maybe to something in that realm.
No, that's awesome. Thank you, Cavan. Thank you so much. It's been fascinating to hear your story, and I'm sure our listeners will take loads out of that. Dream big, spot the opportunities when they come along. Life isn't linear, and be positive and work hard, and don't be afraid to go back to education as well, perhaps. But listen, thank you so much again, Cavan. To all our listeners, I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll be back soon with another episode. Thanks very much.
Thank you.